All right, thanks for joining, everyone. We'll just wait a couple more minutes for everyone to join. Bear with us a couple more minutes. All right, for those of you who just joined, welcome. We said we're going to give a couple more minutes past the hour just to give an opportunity for everyone else to finish their meetings, lunch, breakfast, depending where they are in the world, and join us. Okay, more people are joining. I had my third coffee, Kenneth, already. Oh, it's brilliant that you already started to introduce yourself. So, right, maybe you should begin. Welcome to our workshop, Crafting Meaningful Data Documentation. It would be great if you can drop your names and where you're from in the chat. It's really exciting meeting you. I will quickly introduce myself whilst you do that. My name is Ovidio Bodnar. Everyone in my company calls me Ovi, and I lead the customer success here at Castor. I am based in the sunny London, not quite so sunny to be fair. It feels like it's been raining since November, to be honest. So I'm based in the north of London in the United Kingdom. My background is in data analytics. I had a few roles in various consultancies, most recently, or I should say for the last 9 years or 10 years, I've been working in the startup world with companies like Burst or ThoughtSpot. And since November of last year, I've joined Castor, hoping to solve and give a hand in resolving the data literacy problem, or challenge rather, that we have. So, hi everyone, Timothy from Denmark. Hello, Anastasia, welcome. We have people from all over the place. Some having their coffee, some finishing their lunches, some getting ready for the afternoon. To start, I would want to give a very brief introduction to Castor. To this note, we'll make sure, though, that you're getting value from this webinar, either if you're a Castor user already, or even if you're not. So, no issues if you're not a Castor user. But who we are, what is Castor? Castor is a modern data catalog, and what sets us apart from the competition is that we are built to harness a company collective intelligence. Big words, but what does that mean in practice? Well, it means that we make it easier for anyone in the company. That means data teams as well as business users to find, understand, and trust their data. We put a strong emphasis on building for user adoption to make that possible. And many high growth brands are trusting us today to help them with a range of use cases, from data democratization, discovery, migration, compliance, and more. Actually, we are rated the highest in the satisfaction in the data catalog category on G2, which we're super proud, because this actually comes from ratings given directly by our users. Okay, but enough about this. Let's get into the workshop. So to start, I would like to hear from you what drove you to register for this workshop, and what do you want to accomplish with better documentation? There's a poll that should pop up on your side. So a few options that you're going to have, you can answer. It could be, that you want to reduce the number of recurring questions so your team gets, from your Slack questions, direct messaging, emails, you name it. Sharing knowledge through the organization, maybe resolving a data literacy problem, simplifying handover for onboarding and offboarding, making data easier to discover, or anything else. If you answer E, please drop the other reasons in the chat. All right. So a few answers coming up. Seems to be all across the spectrum, which is great. Great. So a lot of B's, to be fair, sharing knowledge and organization. So that data literacy thing, but seems to come from all over the place. A, B, C, and D. Perfect. Well, to get crystal clear, what we're going to cover today, hopefully, will be all of the above. So here's on the deck what we're going to go through. So first, we're going to start with building a framework for crafting meaningful documentation. So what do we need to put in place to be successful in this exercise? And then next, we're going to go through some best practices, and my colleague Louise from our product management team is going to join me to go through that section. But basically, what will be those best practices to build good documentation? And finally, we'll discuss efficiency, because we know there's usually a high priority projects waiting. We all have migrations, new initiatives within the company, and no one wants to spend all of their time documenting the data. So being proactive and making it as easy as possible for our contributors is the key thing. So let's get started. So as with any good plan, organization counts. So we're starting here with a quick framework. Here at Castor, we've talked with hundreds of people using data in their daily jobs, business users, data teams. And whilst they're all using it in a different manner, there's 6 elements that came together to make documentation successful. At the high level, they are, well, first of all, you need to organize and structure the data to be easy to be discovered. Then the second would be to delegate and collaborate. Assign ownership. It's not a one-person job. Follow the best practices, and this is one that we have going to have a separate section to dive deeper into it. And then obviously we need to put all of the mechanisms in place and the mediums to handle and respond thoughtfully to feedback. Very important, and one very close to my heart is not to forget the people. Who is your target audience, and adjust to it. And then obviously iterate and improve. So I will now go deeper into one by one, and I will start obviously with the structure in your organization. So to organize your documentation, it is really important to start with a clear and well-organized structure. This structure shouldn't be too detailed. That's this for the documentation itself, but it should include the main categories and hierarchy to make it easier for the users to discover the data. So, for example, your hierarchy could be, could be your teams and domains and processes or data projects, depending on how your company is organized. This might seem obvious, but there's a reason why we're beginning here. And that's because without a clear hierarchy, it's easier for documentation to become difficult to navigate, especially as more context is added over time. And if it's difficult to navigate, well, it's not useful. Okay. What does a good structure look like in practice? If your documentation is scattered across multiple sources, you can create a centralized homepage with all of the links. Or your structure could live in a data catalog, and that makes it slightly easier. As long as it's accessible and it's shared with the stakeholders, you're off to a good start. Right. Once you structure your data, you might be ready to dive in and start documenting. But if you just hit go, your efforts aren't going to be most impactful. So first, you should really prioritize. Whoever is leading the effort, that might be you or a colleague, should think about what is the most meaningful to document first. Typically, these will be the most popular assets in your estate, right? Your most popular dashboards, the tables that are being hit the most. Or it might be those metrics where, depending on the team that you speak to, there are multiple definitions. Or maybe you have a strategic initiative or a data program which you're currently developing that you're aligned to, that you want to start documenting those assets first. Well, whatever the priorities, once they are set, you get a chance to make documentation collaborative, because it's not a one-person job. So you can start delegating responsibilities, assign ownership to different people in your organization. Assign each of your key data assets to team members and ensure that they're equipped to provide those descriptions, tag the data, track new development. And you might wonder who those people, who those owners might be. Sometimes they are the creators of the asset. Sometimes they are the most frequent users, or maybe business people who are most equipped and they know the process the best. And then once that's done, as with everything, right, you'll want to have the mediums to share and capture feedback. So you've created a structure for your data, you've prioritized it, and you've delegated it. Assuming that your documentation is complete, and the reason I'm mentioning this is that we're going to have a special section to discuss best practices, in which we'll dive into a few minutes. The next step is to create good feedback loops. So what does it mean? First, you need to create a medium to even collect feedback. And that could mean different things, right? It could mean maybe a Slack channel, a Teams channel, office hours. Whatever it is, have that medium to be able to capture the feedback. It is super important to set a participation mindset and let people know that a good documentation culture is evolving and is collaborative. From there, you should educate data consumers to ask questions in your data catalog. This builds the habit for them to search, right, for what they need before turning to ask a question or direct messaging your team. But to be honest, it's incredibly difficult to completely remove any questions, right? However, if they are searching first in a catalog, the questions will probably be better questions rather than information that they could find themselves. Next up to notice is to see if the same questions popping up again. And something very specific that comes into my mind in my previous jobs was like, well, how often is this data refreshed? Or it's a great transactions table. Do I have data from 2019, for example? It's like, if those questions keep coming up again, right, that probably is a good opportunity to improve and update your asset with that documentation. And finally, from a feedback perspective, our last piece of advice is to be patient and always link to the documentation. There will be people who ask, even if your catalog is available and accessible. If you respond by providing them the link to the documentation, by sending them to the source of the data, right, you will be training them to become self-sufficient, even if it might be taking a little bit longer than you would like. Ultimately, you would want data to be used, so patience will really help a lot there. We're almost done with the framework part. This one is very close to my heart. It is known that, you know, changing the human behavior is harder than changing technology. So when we think about creating a meaningful documentation culture, we need to be careful and consider how we are rolling this out and what change management processes we need to put in place. That's why our advice is, when you introduce your documentation approach, break it into 4 sections. Ensure that you get the buy-in from the users. Explain the problem that you're trying to resolve by introducing documentation, the vision for the future. Tailor your message depending on your audience, right? The benefits of a documentation solution will be very different to a data user versus a business user. So don't be generic in your messaging. Ensure that your audience know what is in for them. Attach to a company's strategic objective if that's possible. That will help with the ROI. And then if you can, ensure that you get and show the executive engagement, ensure that you can attach the executive engagement is supporting the messaging across the board. Right. And last but not least, you will have all of the feedback you will be rolling out. Remember to iterate and improve, right? Your approach of continuous improvements, it could be, right, you first review the good alignment between the strategy, the tooling, then you check the usage, and then based on what you found, you review in your reviews and checks, you communicate and you iterate back. The iteration cycle, right, this could be painful, but it shouldn't be done very often. It can be done maybe once or twice a year. You don't want to be shifting it too much, but always is a good idea to take a step back, right, and look at the big picture. So we just spent a few minutes on our framework as the first step for meaningful documentation. And as we're about to get on the best practices, but first let's do a little bit of application. So we want you to basically apply the framework within your organization. So if you can take 2 minutes to review and write down the 3 steps based on the framework that we went through. If you can share that on the screen, please, on the chat, that would be great. So please share that, the 3 next steps based on the framework that we just went through, that you will take in your organization. That would be fantastic. So that could be, maybe I should take a step back. Is it creating better structure for your data? Is it maybe thinking a little bit more about how to roll it out and communicate it to the user? Could be assigning better ownership or creating a feedback loop. Really curious to see what do you think would be the three ones that you would choose. Or it could be two or one, whichever that might be. Or maybe it's putting some of the iteration processes in place if you don't have one already. Those would be the ones to consider. I think there are answers coming through. Probably everyone's writing like really long answer. I can see people typing. Maybe we'll come back. Structure the data, best practice, iterate and improve. So yeah, all great things. Oh, fabulous. Oh, it was almost similar, very similar answers. So structure and delegate seems to be the top ones that are coming in. This is really great. So now the part we'll be waiting for, let's move to the best practices for the data documentation. Thank you, Piotr. That's very detailed. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to share with you on the chat. My colleague will share with you a cheat sheet. This is something that you can take away with you and save it for future reference. But to bring a little bit more life to the best practices, I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker. Louise is my colleague from product management team. Maybe Louise, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Of course. Thanks, Avi. So I'm Louise. I'm a product manager at Castor. And in a previous life, I was also a data scientist.
Thank you. Right, Louise. So obviously, as a product manager, part of your work is to understand the pain points in the documentation of the documentation organization. So based on your experience, on your interviews that you had with your clients and prospects that you spoke to, what is the general baseline for the most organization? Where do they start? And what is the main challenge that people face when we talk about documentation?
Well, the main pain point and the main point where they start is that they know that documentation is important. Everyone wants it, everyone's asking for it, but it's never urgent. And so most of the time, most of our customers come in and they have almost no documentation done. If they have some, it's quite scattered. It's often also out of date. And so the biggest pain point they have is that they see Mount Everest. They see the amount of documentation that they have to do. They are not sure how they're going to be able to make it, and they often feel discouraged. And for this, the key point is scoping out what is actually useful to document. I know within our own pool of clients, what we've noticed is that we have 50% of their tables which have not been used either by human or system in the past 30 days, which means you can all, for them globally, you cut the documentation by half. And then afterwards, you can also check if you want to scope out more, well, who's asking questions about what assets? What are the questions which are most recurrent? But this being said, it's okay right now if you have no documentation, and it's just you have to find a way to process it so that it becomes less scary of a process.
Very interesting. So it all comes down to those priorities that we were talking about. Very interesting numbers there. 50% of the data hasn't been used in the last 3 days based on what we're seeing. And I'm pretty sure that this is very familiar to everyone on the website. I don't want to even go to the fields. But next question is like when people decide, from your experience, when people decide to onboard on a big documentation effort, what would you recommend as the top 3 best practices to set them out for success?
Well, first of all, the most important thing is assigning scope and deadlines. You need to make people responsible for documentation. Otherwise, as I said, important, never urgent, it's not going to get done. Once you have people who are assigned, it's super important to measure the progress. Within our customers, one thing that worked the best, where we've seen the most results, and we have companies who started with 0 documentation and got 60% of their documentation done within a quarter is simply by being to say like, okay, this person has completed X% of the amount of columns they were supposed to do. So keeping track is really what's key, and it's what enables users who have tasks which aren't urgent to still be able to tackle them. And then lastly, gamify. So this, I know it comes from a very product point of view, but at Castor last week, even we held a documentathon where we decided, okay, let's gather the team, have 1 hour where we all start documenting. We count the amount of documentation each person has achieved, and it creates a sense of competition. It's also team building, and this is how you get it done in a nice way.
Yeah, I'm not competitive at all, but no, I love this. Keep it fun, right? Scope, assign deadlines, clear ownership, and then measure progress and iterate, right? Very good advices. Now, once we get going, and actually this is something that refers to myself, because I was trying to document, for example, a few dashboards I created recently, was like, what would you say that separates good documentation to bad documentation?
Well, to start off with, it's just focus on the why. Why are you documenting? You're not documenting just to fill out a page, there's a purpose. Most often, this is to help consumers of data understand the data that they're using. And from personal experience, what I found when I had to document is that it's better to state the obvious than not to. So it's a bit unintuitive. You think that you're writing something which is boring and which no one will care about, and you'll think it's blah, blah. But stating the obvious is going to reassure the consumers that their intuition is actually right. And this gives you also a good idea of like the amount of detail that you should go in.
Stating the obvious. I love this. So yeah, focus on the why, right? Why a particular dashboard exists, right? Is it to, I don't know, support a particular process? Why is a table there? Is it because it's part of an ETL, or is it good for analytics? Yeah, so think about the audience. This is, again, come back to the framework and understanding your audience and your business users. Now, documentation obviously exists for tables, dashboards, but it's not just that, right? What else should be considered in your documentation effort, Louise?
So documenting tables is documenting at micro level. You're documenting the most detailed things you can. So what else you can document is about taking a step back. So you have several tables, and then you see that, oh, there's common metrics in these tables. So maybe you should create dedicated documentation for those metrics, where also in this documentation, you'll be able to explain the subtleties of the metrics across the tables. For example, revenue has a different definition for the marketing team and the finance team. This is like key so that afterwards everyone across the organization can understand and speak common language. You can also take even a step further back than metrics, which is, okay, now I understand the what and the who. So you can associate domains or teams to those metrics to say like, okay, together, all these metrics describe this concept, and this is what's key to our business. And then lastly, one thing which I think is always great is a frequently asked questions. It saves everyone time when you see that you keep getting asked the same question. It just releases a lot of frustration just to have a clean document, and then have people know where to go to if they have a quick question.
That's great advice. Thank you, Louise. Metrics, glossary of terms, FAQs, domains, all of these things are not necessarily data assets, but they are equally as important as a data asset to provide that context, right, to our documentation. Well, just to end, Louise, any advice, people looking at level up their documentation, that you would like to give?
Of course. So documentation should be considered as something that's alive. It's not just a stale document which is done once and then can be put in a shelf. Documentation should evolve as your data and your organization changes. So to have amazing documentation, it's important to incorporate in your processes to get it done little by little, so that afterwards it stays up to date with the changes which you're facing.
Louise, thank you so much for this. We shared the cheat sheets. I know that you've contributed probably 90% in putting that together, so really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your participation. So
My
just
pleasure.
to get going, thank you. Now that we've discussed best practices, the next stage of our webinar is to get into efficiency. So with that, let's start a little bit with just yet another poll on how you are actually documenting your data today. I know that could be being directly in the code through annotations and Markdown. Maybe you do it in Snowflake or in dbt or Airflow or you name it. Or it might be wiki pages where you're putting documentation, or maybe it's a data catalog that you already have. If you select other, please specify in the chat what other might be, like Frederick. Thank you. Excel files. Oh, I bet everyone loves a piece of Excel. Google Sheets. Yes, very familiar with that. dbt and some notions. Yeah, some notion. Okay, a little bit of everything. I think this is across the board. Now, there's a lot of tools and there's a lot of way of doing it. So we can do it directly in the code, right, through annotations and Markdown. There's pros and cons for each one of the approaches, either annotations, wiki pages, or data catalog. If you're doing it directly in the code, right, the developers will love it because it's close to the code base. You can still set owners and tags. You can version it and you can review it. However, it typically is related to the technology you're using. The documentation is not in a single place. And if you ask a business user, right, probably will not want to talk to you and even look into it. And right, if you're using wiki pages, on the other hand, the business users might like it because it's more friendly. Something like Notion or Confluence is something that they can relate to. They had basic search capabilities and a lot of layout features that can make it pretty and look nice. However, they're not connecting to the data assets, right? They're not versioned and they will have to be updated manually. And also some of them would lack the advanced searches. Now, if you're going on a data catalog, right, you will have all of the documentation in one place, easy for non-technical users and the data teams. It will be versioned. It can sync back to popular tools, so it gets back to the user, either is dbt or maybe a BI tool. You can search, you can pin asset. However, it's not free, right? So your data catalog also has a con. But ultimately, what I would like to get with this is like you need to choose what's best for your team based on the size, the stage, and the strategy of your organization. We do think it's never too early to get the benefits of a data catalog, however. So to close out this session, I'll give you a quick tour on how this looks in practice before opening the floor to any questions that you might have. So I'll quickly switch to the demo environment. But before I get going, I would like to specify that, give a little bit of context on Castor. So Castor connects with and integrates with the most popular data sources out there. So basically it synchronizes metadata for data sources like your data warehouse technology, things like Redshift, Snowflake, or Synapse. It also can connect to your modeling like dbt or possibly with your BI tools, the Tableaus, the Lookers, the ClickSense or Power BIs of the world. So all of that metadata is synchronized and available in Castor. And as I said, we are designed and we have a business user focus. So the most prominent feature that you'll see in Castor when you go to the homepage is the search bar. This is the place where you can, as a user, search for an account. And the example I'm going to use is going to be, let's say I want to search for user. Now, you might get a lot of results, okay? Some of these results could be tables, dashboards, right? That's why we are providing the opportunity to filter your data. Either you want to look at tables or dashboards, or maybe you want to go even in the columns, or it might be that you're looking for a specific term in a knowledge article, maybe a metric or a glossary term. Tags is also something that I would strongly recommend. We were discussing and prioritizing and tagging the data to make it easier for the discovery. In this case, I don't have any tags. So something that I will use is actually the popularity, right? We spoke about popularity, that is very important for the documentation effort when you start prioritizing what is the most impactful thing to start documenting. Very similar. Popularity could be used for discovery. So in this example, I'm looking for the user table that is mostly used in the BI layer. And this is because the popularity in Castor is calculated based on user-generated queries. This is very important because we're excluding service accounts, ETLs. This is pure hits from the users. And if I go into this particular table, right, the first things I'm going to see, because it's a table, right, is the columns tab. I will find information about the types of the columns, the names, if it's a primary key, if it includes PII. And as I've mentioned, we are synchronizing metadata from sources. We're also synchronizing descriptions. In this case, the description comes from dbt, but it could be a Snowflake, it could be your Looker instance, your Power BI, and so forth. Also, we are synchronizing this back. So if you are to decide to write your own description, for example, you can also sync it back to dbt or your BI tools using Castor. A very powerful tool is like if you like to overwrite, or if you already have a description for a field, all you have to do is when you type it is the description will pop up and you'll be able to, with a simple click, to paste that description into your fields and make it really easy. So we're talking about that productivity increase, right, using Castor. You can do that directly in the table, or you can even propagate description across the board. So there are features to allow you to write a single description for a field and then propagate it to all of the tables within your asset. Another thing that you can do in this tab is to see where the field is coming from, where is it going. Maybe I want to see the table lineage. Again, in here, I can see that the user table is formed of from 4 other tables and is going to a few Looker explorers and maybe dashboards going forward. So I can expand this and go forward. And maybe I can see the SQL source. Where you might wonder, well, hold on a second. This is not very business user friendly, but what I want to show you here is that we've recently introduced this feature called Castor AI, which basically looks at what it is typically a very technical concept, the SQL script, and then translates that into plain English, right? In this case that I'm presenting you at the moment, basically it goes through 6 lines of codes, right? It is pretty straightforward for a technical user to understand it, but maybe a business user will have no idea what a concat or a date trunk means, right? Basically, this will explain in plain English, right, what it does, where is it going to, and then, you know, watch out this space. We're talking, this webinar is about documentation. The way we're seeing this evolving is like more and more AI being involved to help with that documentation effort. That probably this could be a first step in your documentation, could be something like Castor AI providing you with that description, right, to give you like a head start. Right. So enough of this. So the other thing we talked about lineage. We also have a lineage tab. So also to add a little bit of context, we have the graphs that you've seen, but also a quick view. If you want to see what are the direct parents from which the asset is being created, you can see it in the lineage tab. If you want to see the raw data, where it's coming from, you see it in sources and what's the lineage from that field. You can see it in children. Very easy feature to export that to see is like if you're making any changes, what can be affected downstream. And then, as I mentioned, this is the place where you put a description of the asset. The description, right, as Luis mentioned, should be focused on the why. Why does the table exist, right? It's used for analytics, it's used for maybe a BI process. And what does it represent? Maybe you want to talk about the key metrics, right? Because this is a presentation table. Very likely key metrics is something that the users will be familiar with. Well, who's the target audience? What's the granularity of the table? Updates and history, tips and tricks, all of that FAQ, right? And as I said, iterate based on the feedback that you get. We also make it easier to capture that figure through our comments. So, for example, if you want to see a frequent user flag or something like that, right? Always iterate on how to get that information and put it in place. And think about who the user is. If this is a table that is primarily focused on the business user, start with the business definition first and then put the technical details last. Queries is another place where you can see what queries run against that table and who is it joined with. We talked about collaboration. Another very important aspect. We understand that trust is a very important aspect nowadays. That's why we are now connecting with tools like DBT test and Soda to be able to expose the results of that test, to give the user the trust that that data that they're looking at, right, is trustful and it's something that they can rely on. If there are any issues, right, this is where this is going to be highlighted on the platform. I mentioned tagging. Something that Louise mentioned is to look at the progress. We here in Castor, we are able to display the progress on how complete a table is, and Louise mentioned those capabilities of reporting on that progress. And something else I would like to mention, I know dashboard is very similar, but something else I would like to mention is the knowledge page. And to make it a bit more real, I thought that would be good to show you how we're using it at Castor, actually, to add context to the documentation. So this is our Castor instance, and you'll see that we've added items around, how to ask informations about data, how to navigate in Castor. We might get new people joining our team, so we created an onboarding section where all of the assets that are related to their particular role is documented. Key metrics, glossaries, right? Things like customer, for example. How many of you have different definitions of customer? I'm sure that you've always came across that. And then most importantly, I work in customer success. I like to document, for example, what's the mission of my organization? Who is a part of the organization? I can even navigate to see, right, for example, Marini, right, these are the things that she's working on. Again, things that are very useful to have in place if you're onboarding new users, if you are to share that documentation with the team and add a little bit of more context to it. I will stop here. I want to see, I'll probably leave a little bit, a few more minutes. If you have any questions on what's been presented today, please share it on the chat. But I hope you found this useful. So if there are any questions, okay, Matt had a questions. How is sharing abilities for non-technical? How is the sharing abilities for the non-technical users in Castor? Is there a cap on the number of users who can review, not contribute on the content of Castor? Okay, so here at Castor, we are a big fan of not necessarily restricting, right, and contributions. So if you are a user who would like to contribute to a particular asset, if you are in a role of a contributor, you can do so, right? And then you might wonder, is like, well, how can I keep control of that? If you can, if you are an owner of an asset, so for example, let me quickly go back to where I was presenting. Each asset, each dashboard, each knowledge page, right, has a owner, right? So if I select an owner, each time when someone actually adds a contribution, you will get notified, and also the history will be maintained with what has changed in your asset. So I hope, Mads, that answered the question. But basically, as a contributor, you can contribute pretty much everywhere in the estate. As an owner or an administrator, you will get notification when something's been added to the knowledge page. Okay, another question's from Frederick. Is it angled towards plugging into data warehouse or data lake assets, or even operational databases to combine it all? Frederick, if this isn't a technology like that, like I've just mentioned, and you can go to our website in the docs, we can obviously integrate any tables from a warehouse or a data lake that you have available. So even if it is an operational database, right, you can definitely bring those tables into Castor and document them. So there shouldn't be any restrictions on that. And obviously there will be, in particular for data engineers, using those tables and maintaining those tables, it will be a very useful asset if you look at lineage documentation and so forth. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, I would like to thank you very much. There might be questions coming later on, so if there's anything that comes to your mind, please feel free to reach out and contact us with whatever questions you might have on Castor or data documentation for that matter. I hope you found this useful, and I hope you're going to join us for our next event in the future. Thank you so much. Have a good day, afternoon, evening.